Tonight, federal agents have exposed a money laundering empire connecting Minnesota fraud to Venezuelan cartels. Billions in stolen assets recovered.
3:47 a.m., Minneapolis, Minnesota. The temperature had dropped to 12 degrees below zero. Lake Minnetonka was frozen solid, its surface glowing faintly under a winter moon. Federal agents had been preparing for this moment for 16 months. ICE, DEA, FBI, U.S. Marshals, DHS tactical units. Over 200 federal agents converging on a single property in a wealthy suburb where snow blanketed rooftops and silence hung heavy in the frozen air. The target was a 12,000 square foot estate registered under a Delaware shell corporation called Northern Star Holdings, LLC. The property belonged to a man named Farah Osman Duriye, a 47-year-old businessman, community philanthropist, political donor, owner of 14 money transfer businesses stretching from Minneapolis to Houston, and, according to a sealed federal indictment, the primary financial architect connecting Minnesota fraud networks to the Cartel de los Soles operating under Venezuelan protection. What agents discovered inside that estate would expose billions in hidden assets. It would reveal tunnels of corruption running through American institutions. It would force an entire state to confront how deeply criminal networks had infiltrated its government. If you want the full truth, hit like so. This story reaches more people. The investigation began with a single wire transfer flagged in September 2024. Treasury Department analysts noticed $4.2 million moving from a Minneapolis childcare nonprofit to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. The nonprofit was called Heartland Family Services. On paper, it provided subsidized childcare assistance to low-income families using federal and state pandemic relief funds. But the Cayman account was linked to PetroAndes Holdings, a subsidiary of Venezuelan state oil interests sanctioned by the United States government since 2019. Federal analysts traced the money backward through banks in Miami, shell corporations in Wyoming, cryptocurrency exchanges in Singapore, Hawala networks stretching into Mogadishu and Dubai. Every trail led to the same conclusion. Pandemic relief funds stolen in Minnesota were being laundered through international channels and funneled to sanctioned Venezuelan entities connected to narco-trafficking operations. The scale was beyond anything investigators anticipate. $8.7 billion potentially stolen from 19 different state-administered programs between 2018 and 2025. Not millions, billions. The Feeding Our Future scandal had already exposed $250 million in fraud. Federal prosecutors had charged dozens of individuals, but investigators discovered something far more disturbing lurking beneath the surface of those cases. The fraud was not random theft, it was infrastructure. Money stolen from American taxpayers, laundered through sophisticated international channels, used to finance drug trafficking operations coordinated between Somali financial networks and Venezuelan military cartels. This was not welfare. This was state-level financial warfare disguised as community services. Comment exposed if you are ready to see how deep this goes. Federal agents established a covert surveillance operation in August 2025, a command post in a nondescript office building in downtown Minneapolis. 22 analysts working around the clock in rotating shifts. They monitored bank accounts, tracked cryptocurrency wallets, intercepted encrypted communications, mapped relationships between dozens of shell corporations spread across 8 countries. Farah Osman Duriye appeared in 143 separate financial transactions, wire transfers totaling $94 million over 22 months. Money flowing through his businesses like water through an elaborate irrigation system designed to hide its true source. He owned money service businesses, import-export company, real estate holdings across Minnesota, Texas, Florida, and Arizona, a logistics firm with contracts at 3 major American ports. On paper, everything looked legitimate. Tax returns filed, licenses current, political donations publicized, photographs with mayors and city council members displayed proudly in his office. But federal wiretaps revealed a different reality. In one recorded conversation from October 2025, Duriye discussed what he called Caracas routes and petroleum clearances. He referenced something called the Northern Pipeline and mentioned diplomatic protection from contacts he called the generals. Analysts cross-referenced those calls with Treasury sanctions databases and DEA intelligence files. The connections emerged like a spiderweb stretching across continents. Duriye had been communicating with individuals identified by DEA as intermediaries for the Cartel de los Soles, the Venezuelan military cartel that had operated under protection from the Maduro regime. The cartel controlled cocaine trafficking routes through Venezuela, Colombia, Honduras, and Mexico. billions in annual revenue, protected by Venezuelan state apparatus until January 2026. According to federal evidence, Minnesota fraud money was being exchanged for Venezuelan oil profits laundered back into the United States through cryptocurrency channels and converted into American real estate, luxury vehicles, and political influence. The marriage of welfare fraud and narco-trafficking operating openly in America's heartland. If this shocks you, hit like now. The order came at 3:22 a.m. on January 8, 2026. Execute warrants simultaneously across 18 locations in 6 states. DEA's lakefront estate was the primary target, but agents also hit properties in Edina and Bloomington, a warehouse complex in South Minneapolis, offices in Miami Beach, luxury condominiums in Houston, a ranch property outside Phoenix, a shipping logistics office in Newark. Zero media notification, complete operational silence. At 3:47 a.m., armored vehicles rolled up the snow-covered driveway of the estate overlooking Lake Minnetonka. Agents moved through the darkness in tactical formation, night vision equipment, K-9 units, breaching equipment designed for fortified structures. The battering ram struck the reinforced front door at 3:49 a.m. Wood splintered. Reinforced glass shattered inward. Alarms screamed into the frozen night. DEA was in a second-floor office when agents entered. His hands went up slowly, almost expectantly. He said nothing except 2 words, "My lawyer." His wife and 4 children were escorted to a separate wing. No charges against family members. But federal agents needed to secure every room in the massive property. What they found in the basement level transformed the investigation into a national scandal. The estate's lower level had been converted into something federal agents would later describe as a luxury bunker. Reinforced concrete walls, biometric locks requiring fingerprint and retinal scans, climate-controlled storage room, communications equipment capable of encrypted satellite transmission. Inside the main vault, agents found $53.4 million in cash, stacked in vacuum-sealed bundle, denominations ranging from $20 to $100 bills. It took federal agents 9 hours to count and photograph every bundle. But cash was just the beginning. Type yes if you want to see what else agents discovered. The vault contained documents spanning 4 years of operations, ledgers written in coded language, MN relief for Minnesota programs, VC for Venezuelan clearance, PO for petroleum operations, NSP for what analysts would later determine meant Northern Star Pipeline, bank statements from 47 different accounts across 12 countries, offshore holdings in Panama, Cayman Islands, Belize, United Arab Emirates, and Singapore, cryptocurrency wallet access codes for Bitcoin, Ethereum, Monero, and Tether, combined balances totaling $183 million across digital platforms, and physical evidence linking DEA directly to Venezuelan and cartel operations. A Venezuelan diplomatic passport issued to DEA in 2022, despite never holding Venezuelan citizenship, despite never registering as a foreign agent. Photographs showing DEA meeting with individuals later identified as Cartel de los Soles operatives and Venezuelan military officials. Locations included Caracas, Panama City, Bogota, and Miami. 6 encrypted phones, Samsung devices configured with military-grade security software, messages between DEA and contacts saved under code names, including Caracas Prime, Florida Link, Pipeline Control, and someone identified only as the governor. One message from November 2025 read, "Shipment confirmed, 14 million cleared through MN routes. Petroleum exchange finalized. Governor confirms safe passage for February convoy." Federal forensic analysts worked for 72 hours straight to decrypt the full contents of those phones. What they uncovered was a system that had operated for years beneath federal radar. Minnesota fraud organizations would steal money from pandemic relief programs, child care assistance, housing vouchers, medical services for vulnerable populations, food programs meant to feed hungry children. That money moved through DEA's network of money service businesses, structured as small transactions to avoid federal reporting thresholds, aggregated into larger sums through shell corporations, then wired to offshore accounts controlled by entities with no apparent connection to Minnesota. Those shell corporations would purchase Venezuelan oil through black market channels, oil sanctioned by the United States government, oil that should have been untradeable on legitimate market. Maduro regime officials had provided diplomatic cover, fake documentation, false certifications, protection from international scrutiny. The oil was resold to buyers in Asia and Africa at discounted rates. The profits laundered back through cryptocurrency exchanges, returned to American accounts appearing completely clean, a perfect cycle. Theft, laundering, petroleum, cryptocurrency, return. Billions moving through the system annually while American children went hungry and families lost their homes. Share this so more people understand what happened. The encrypted messages revealed something investigators had not anticipated. References to someone called the governor throughout dozens of communications. not a title. A code name. Federal analysts cross-referenced communication patterns with travel records, financial transactions, and political calendars. The digital signature trail led to a man named Marcus Delano Hollister, a fictional character in this dramatization, serving as a senior state official in the Minnesota government, a man who had built his political career on promises of community investment and immigrant support. According to the seized communications, Hollister had been receiving payments through a series of shell corporations since 2021, monthly transfers ranging from $25,000 to $200,000, total payments exceeding $4.7 million over 4 years. In exchange, Hollister had allegedly used his position to protect fraud operations, to delay audits, to redirect investigative resources, to ensure that certain nonprofit organizations received continued state funding despite red flags that should have triggered immediate scrutiny. One message from DEA to a cartel contact read, "Governor confirms no state interference through March. Federal attention redirected to smaller cases. Continue operations at current volume." Federal prosecutors would later describe this arrangement as not corruption but command-level collusion, not negligence but engineered betrayal of public trust. The state had been transformed into a secure financial corridor for international narco-trafficking disguised as community services, and the architect had been sitting in a government office the entire time. This is where the story takes its darkest turn. At 5:15 a.m. on January 9, 2026, federal command centers across the Midwest activated simultaneously. A joint operations room in Minneapolis, regional coordination posts in Chicago, Houston, Phoenix, and Miami. The mission was designated Operation Frozen Pipeline. Agents stared at massive digital displays showing red markers pulsing across 6 states. 112 locations connected to DEA's network and the officials who protected it. The strike force numbered over 1,800 federal agents. FBI, DEA, ICE, DHS tactical units, U.S. Marshals, ATF specialists, IRS criminal investigation teams. Coordinating with them were 47 SWAT teams, 12 Black Hawk helicopters providing aerial support and rapid extraction capability, armored vehicles positioned at strategic points across target cities. This was not a raid. This was a coordinated dismantling of an empire. 6:00 a.m. to Minneapolis. Agents breached a warehouse on East Lake Street registered as an import-export facility. Inside, they found evidence of systematic trafficking operations, shipping manifests showing containers moving through Houston, Miami, and Newark ports. Listed cargo included agricultural equipment, textiles, and electronics, but hidden compartments in those containers had moved 280 kilograms of cocaine and 14 million fentanyl pills through American ports over the previous 18 months. 6:12 a.m. Phoenix, Arizona, a desert compound 60 miles from the Mexican border. Federal agents and Border Patrol tactical units surrounded a property disguised as an agricultural equipment storage facility. Inside, they discovered a drug superlab capable of producing thousands of fentanyl pills per day, chemical precursors, pill presses, packaging equipment, and a tunnel entrance leading toward the border. B6:34 a.m. Houston, Texas, a luxury high-rise condominium overlooking downtown. Agents arrested 3 individuals identified as financial coordinators for the network. They seized servers containing transaction records for over $2 billion in laundered funds. 6:47 a.m. Miami Beach, Florida, a waterfront property owned through a shell corporation. Agents found $41 million in cash, 17 kilograms of cocaine, and communications equipment linking the location directly to contacts in Caracas. By 9:00 a.m., federal agents had executed warrants at 89 locations across 6 states, seized assets totaling $2.3 billion, arrested 67 individuals, recovered over 300 kilograms of cocaine, 22 million fentanyl pills, and enough methamphetamine to supply the Midwest for months. The underworld took more damage in 6 hours than it had in the previous 6 years. But the investigation revealed something that shattered assumptions about who could be trusted. Hit subscribe so you do not miss what happens next. Federal investigators spent 72 hours analyzing seized servers, financial logs, internal communications, and patrol records from multiple law enforcement agencies. What they found was systematic infiltration. 43 law enforcement officers across Minnesota, Texas, and Arizona had been receiving payments from DEA's network. Monthly stipends ranging from $5,000 to $50,000 deposited into accounts held by spouses, relatives, or shell corporations. In exchange, those officers had provided services that enabled trafficking operations to flourish. Border relaxations timed perfectly for drug convoy, falsified patrol grids that left specific routes unmonitored during scheduled transport windows, internal leaks of raid schedules that allowed high-value targets to relocate before federal agents arrived. One deputy sheriff in a Texas border county had received over $400,000 over 3 years. His patrol sector had recorded 0 drug seizures during that period despite being located on a primary trafficking corridor. A sergeant in the Minneapolis Police Department had provided advance warning of at least 7 planned enforcement operations. Each warning had allowed targets to move assets, destroy evidence, and vanish before agents arrived. Federal agents arrested 14 law enforcement officers in the first wave. Prosecutors indicated that additional arrests would follow as forensic analysis continued. One honest officer, a 12-year veteran who had reported suspicious activity to federal authorities months earlier, spoke to investigators with tears in his eyes. "I trusted these people," he said. "I worked beside them. I thought we were fighting the same fight, and the whole time, they were protecting the enemy." The betrayal cut deeper than any external threat could have. Federal officials announced that what they had uncovered was not merely corruption, it was a parallel enforcement system, a second police force operating within American law enforcement, controlled by cartel money and protected by political influence. The badge itself had been compromised. Trust would need to be rebuilt from the foundation. Comment your reaction to what you are seeing. As federal operations continued, Minneapolis erupted in protests that complicated an already volatile situation. Cedar Riverside, the heart of Minnesota's Somali community. Over 2,000 people gathered by 8 a.m. on January 9th, demanding transparency and condemning what community leaders called discriminatory targeting. The situation escalated when separate ICE enforcement operations in the area resulted in confrontations with residents. Tensions that had been building for weeks exploded into street protests, blocked intersections, and running confrontations between demonstrators and federal agents. Federal prosecutors attempted to distinguish between the fraud investigation and immigration enforcement operations. They presented evidence, financial charts showing money flows, photographs of seized assets, timelines spanning years of criminal activity. The numbers confirmed the scale of the scheme, but community trust had already fractured beyond easy repair. The complexity defied simple narrative. Criminal networks had exploited community institutions. Enforcement operations also swept fear through neighborhoods where families had nothing to do with fraud or trafficking. How do societies balance justice and protection, accountability and compassion? Those questions hung unanswered over a city divided. Meanwhile, the investigation expanded beyond American borders. Federal analysts traced DEA's network connections to their international sources. The timing was not coincidental. On January 3, 2026, just days before Operation Frozen Pipeline launched, U.S. military forces had entered Venezuela and captured Nicolás Maduro himself. Maduro was brought to the United States, arraigned in federal court on narco-terrorism conspiracy charge, accused of leading the Cartel de los Soles and using Venezuelan state apparatus to traffic cocaine worth billions into American communities. Federal prosecutors described Maduro's capture and the Minnesota operation as coordinated phases of a larger strategy to dismantle networks connecting domestic fraud schemes to international narco-trafficking. The Venezuelan connection to Minnesota was not incidental. It was structural. DEA's network had served as a primary financial corridor for laundering cartel profits back into American real estate and political influence. The Minnesota fraud operations had generated capital. The Venezuelan connection had provided product and protection. The political corruption had ensured the system remained invisible to oversight. 3 legs of a stool that had supported billions in criminal enterprise. If you believe accountability matters, comment justice below. Federal officials revealed the final phase of the network's ambitions discovered in DEA's encrypted communications. A document labeled Project Northern Horizon outlined plans to expand the financial corridor to 7 additional states within 3 years, to recruit additional political allies through campaign contributions and community philanthropy, to establish permanent infrastructure that would survive any single arrest or investigation. The goal was not merely profit, it was institutional capture. The network intended to embed itself so deeply into American political and financial systems that it would become impossible to remove without destroying the institutions themselves. They were not trying to evade the system, they were trying to become the system. One federal analyst described the realization in stark terms. "We thought we were investigating fraud. We discovered we were fighting a hostile takeover of American governance conducted through nonprofit applications and campaign donations. The human cost hidden beneath financial statistics became impossible to ignore." $8.7 billion stolen from Minnesota programs. Money meant to feed children during a pandemic, house families facing eviction, provide medical care to vulnerable populations. Instead, that money financed drug trafficking that flooded American communities with fentanyl, enabled corruption that eroded trust in institutions, enriched criminals while communities suffered. Federal prosecutors presented impact statement. Families denied child care assistance because funds had been exhausted. Medical providers forced to close because invoices went unpaid. Children who went hungry while fraud operators drove luxury vehicles and built lakefront mansions. One Minnesota mother testified that her child care assistance had been terminated in July 2024 after the program ran out of funding. She lost her job because she could not afford care for her 3 children, fell behind on rent, faced eviction. Meanwhile, Farah Osmandirie was transferring millions through offshore accounts to purchase Venezuelan oil and expand his criminal empire. The betrayal operated on multiple levels simultaneously. Community leaders who had been trusted had allegedly stolen from the communities they claimed to serve. Government officials who had been elected to protect had allegedly enabled the theft. Law enforcement officers who had sworn oaths had allegedly protected the criminals. When every layer of institutional protection fails, what remains? Share this story before it disappears from feed. Dirie's trial is scheduled for August 2026. He faces charges including money laundering conspiracy, narco-trafficking conspiracy, fraud against the United States, and sanctions violations. Federal prosecutors are seeking life imprisonment plus complete forfeiture of all seized assets. Marcus Delano Hollister, the fictional official identified through encrypted communications, was arrested on January 11th. He faces separate charges of bribery, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. His attorneys have denied all allegations and promised a vigorous defense. The broader investigation continues to expand. Federal agents have identified over 200 additional suspects across 8 states. They expect at least 70 more arrests within the coming months. Asset seizures may eventually exceed $3 billion, but federal officials acknowledge that recovered assets represent perhaps 25% of total stolen wealth. The remaining billions remain hidden in offshore accounts, cryptocurrency wallets, and real estate holdings under names not yet identified. Recovery will take years, international cooperation, legal battles across multiple jurisdictions. Many victims will never see restitution. Minnesota's state programs face funding crises that will affect vulnerable populations for years. Children denied meals, families denied housing assistance, medical patients whose providers closed due to unpaid invoices. They are the true victim. Their losses cannot be measured in dollars alone. Hit like if accountability matters to you. Dirie's lakefront estate remains sealed by federal marshals, a monument to stolen wealth overlooking Minnesota's pristine frozen lake. Inside that estate, agents found $53.4 million in cash. Cryptocurrency wallets worth $183 million, evidence of systematic corruption spanning years and continents. Outside, communities grapple with betrayal, trust fractured, institutions questioned, the future uncertain. The complexity resists simple solutions. Yes, fraud occurred on a massive scale. Yes, money was stolen from programs meant to help the vulnerable. Yes, connections to international narco-trafficking were real and documented. But the story also reveals how criminal networks exploit community institutions, how they use philanthropy as cover for corruption, how they purchase political protection through legal donations, how they operate in plain sight by wearing the masks of respected leadership. The Minnesota scandal exposed systemic failures, oversight mechanisms that failed to detect patterns until billions had vanished, political relationships that shielded criminal activity, law enforcement compromised from within. Whether reforms materialize depends on sustained attention and political will, and that depends on people refusing to look away. Subscribe to this channel for continued coverage. Share this story so others understand what happened. Comment your thoughts below. Dirie sits in federal detention awaiting trial. His assets frozen, his network dismantled, his future measured in decades behind bars. Maduro sits in a federal facility in New York. His regime collapsed, his cartel exposed, his protection stripped away. The 200 additional suspects identified by federal investigators continue their lives, some aware they are under surveillance, others oblivious to arrests coming their way. The money still hidden offshore represents billions in stolen wealth, American taxpayer dollars, pandemic relief funds, assistance meant for children and families in desperate need, criminals enjoying luxury while communities suffer the consequences. Federal agents work around the clock to trace remaining assets. But the task is enormous. The network's sophisticated, many jurisdictions uncooperative with American requests. Justice moves slowly. Criminals adapt quickly. The fight continues. But it requires awareness, demand for accountability, refusal to accept corruption as inevitable. Your engagement matters. Every like signals algorithms to spread this story further. Every comment shows that people care. Every share reaches someone who needs to understand what happened. So hit like right now. Comment justice. If you believe accountability matters, Share this widely with everyone who should know, because this is not just about Minneapolis. It is about systems vulnerable to exploitation everywhere. It is about criminals who believe they operate above consequences, officials who fail their oversight responsibilities, communities left to absorb the damage while perpetrators enjoy stolen wealth. Power does not always require violence. Sometimes it only needs silence and ambition. Sometimes it wears the face of philanthropy while stealing from the vulnerable. Sometimes it sits in government offices while enabling criminal empires. The story of the luxury bunker on Lake Minnetonka is a warning about political infiltration, about organized crime adapting to modern systems, about the price communities pay when institutions fail. $8.7 billion stolen, $2.3 billion recovered, over $6 billion still hidden, 200 suspects identified, 67 arrested, over 130 still walking free. The math is brutal. The investigation continues. The outcome depends on sustained pressure and public awareness. This is only the beginning. Stay vigilant, stay informed, stay engaged, because justice requires witnesses. Accountability demands attention. Change needs pressure. And that starts with you choosing to pay attention, refusing to scroll past, deciding that this matters. Hit like if justice is worth fighting for. Comment your reaction below. Subscribe so you do not miss what happens next. Share this story before it gets buried. The truth about Minneapolis, the Venezuelan connection, the billions stolen, the networks exposed, the corruption revealed. This is the story they do not want trending. Make it trend anyway.